Hello everyone, I am Kuhu Srivastav and on behalf of Rolly Books, I welcome you all to this episode of Rolly Pulse brought to you by Rolly Books. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already and make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook to never miss an update. Today, we'll be talking about a book called Urnabhih, Chanakya, Scribe by Sumedha V Ojha. Sumedha is a historian and author. She is a 1992 batch IRS officer who switched careers in 2014. Sumedha brings ancient India alive with books and documentaries based on the Mauryans. Her English translation of the Valmiki Ramayana was published in 2016, and she's currently writing a book on the women of ancient India. Sumedha will be in conversation with Rashmi Bansal. Rashmi Bansal is a writer, entrepreneur, and a motivational speaker. An author of 10 best-selling books on entrepreneurship, Rashmi co-founded Jam, Just Another magazine, which went on to become India's most popular youth magazine. She has been a regular contributor to Business World, Business Today, and currently writes a column for Dainik Bhaskar newspaper. I welcome you both. So Rashmi, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Kuhu. Hello, namaste, Sumedha. Wonderful to meet you online. Yeah, it's been about 6-7 years since we met first at the Hyderabad Literature Festival, where I just happened to pick up your book Urnabhih because I love the cover, and then I actually bumped into you and got to know
that
you.
That was the start of a beautiful friendship.
In Geneva twice. Yeah, so you made us wait a long time for the second part. I think I read the book, right? I don't know, aapka favorite subject tha ki nahi. Was it your favorite subject in school or did you develop a love for it later on in life?
No, it was, hello Rashmi, hello everyone. And yeah, we can jump straight into the conversation because like Rashmi said, we've known each other for 6-7 years now. When she picked up that book and we bumped into each other, it was the start of a transcontinental friendship. We meet sometimes, but we keep in touch always. So yes, it's sometimes just wonderful what happens when you go to these literary fests, etc., and actually meet people. So history was my favorite subject, Rashmi, but along with economics. So it was economic history, and it was actually the Arthashastra when I was about 12 years old, which fascinated me. And so many decades later, it continues to fascinate me as much as it had. So yes, history, economics, the past, it has always been something which has fascinated me. And you were saying that this book took a long time to come, the second part, but it was unfortunately also COVID time. So I think because of COVID, this was delayed for a very long time. And I also feel that the gap is too much, but I promise to get the next one out.
All right, so here I have the book with me, Chanakya, Scribe. It's different from the first, the cover is different, but I like it. It's quite colorful and it's interesting, has a lot of different elements. And, I found that this sequel actually has a very good mix of the history and the plot. I think in the first book, you had a little more of historical detail. And in this, you've toned it down. So I think, I don't know that was a conscious decision or that's what your editors decided, but this was really fast-paced as a book. And I just wanted to know about your journey from history to historical fiction, because that's not very, common. So how did that happen?
I think, Rashmi, I wanted to read such books. Having grown up reading books of, Jean Plaidy and Georgette Eyre, etc., Philippa Carr, who wrote very nice books on English history. So I really wanted to read those books on Indian history, and there are none. So I think I decided I would write the book I wanted to read and write about the period which impressed me or fascinated me the most. And those were the Mauryans, of course, not just because I have been born in Patliputra and on the banks of the Ganges, of the Ganga River, but also because the Mauryans are the first empire of India. We are basically following a template set by the Mauryans. So I always call ourselves the modern Mauryans. As far as history is concerned, I don't know, there is a deep desire within me to present the past in the same way to others as I see it. I see it as a beautiful, fascinating, glowing, interesting, complex place. I want everyone to see it like that. So whenever I read, whatever I read, there is something which happens inside over here, and then it becomes part of my story. You asked me whether the toning down of the historical bits was a conscious decision. Actually, it was not, because I don't write in a very methodical way. I just read, research. Something goes in here and comes out. So none of it is really very conscious. It just happens in that alchemy which is happening in my mind. But I also think that in the first book, I was setting the scene.
Hmm.
So in a way, if you read the first book, then you have all of it in your head. So in the second book, perhaps, I can just go on with the story. I think that was also part of it. And in the third book, perhaps you'll find that the story will take a greater precedence and the background will recede into the background. Because you see, there is a problem of setting the background in these kind of stories because it's very unfamiliar to us today.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. And you've been what can I say, I've discussed a lot of things with you when I write and language, etc. So I have spoken of all this before with you about the difficulties of using Hindi or Sanskrit, but I felt that some parts of my story were not possible without it. So it's a tough proposition to write a serious historical fiction book. Is a very tough proposition, and the segue or the movement from history to fiction is also not an easy one, because there is something on which you must hang the story, so you need some fictional elements. However, the history can never be wrong, and I pride myself on that the history in my books will never be wrong. You do any
I
conscious
think that's
thinking
the
about
best kind of historical fiction where the history is accurate, but the characters are created by you and they are relatable to us in the modern age. So your main protagonist, Misrakesi, she is a modern woman even in Mauryan times. I mean, we don't actually know what women were like then because in our history textbooks, they never told us anything. They just said this war was fought, that treaty was signed. We don't know how ordinary people lived. So I think for me, the really fascinating part about your books is how we get to know about the ordinary life of the Mauryan people. And Mr. Casey doesn't come across as anyone, who's ancient, historical, and unrelatable. In fact, in this particular book, in Chanakya Scribe, you made her like having the same dilemma as a working woman. When she has a baby and she has to then decide, how to manage her baby and her twins and her job. I mean, I thought that made it very modern. So yeah, I mean, that was a very good touch. And many other such small nuances are there. So tell us a little bit about Mr. Casey. Is she a reflection of you?
I think that perhaps should be answered by someone else other than me, somebody who knows me and who has read the book. Consciously, no, but unconsciously, perhaps, because I would definitely agree that the kind of ways in which she approaches situations and the things that she does, well, perhaps I would do the same. In book one, if you remember, there was a lot of office politics. So there always is office politics, and sometimes women get the brunt of office politics in a particularly sexist way. And Mr. Casey also felt the same, although her boss assured her that it's nothing like that, but she also felt the same. She also felt that she was treated like a novice and she was not taken seriously. I think all of us, whenever we've been new in our workplaces, face the same dilemmas, and the struggle to establish ourselves, to establish our credibility, and to establish our expertise and how we work, the ways in which we work. These are all very important. You say that we don't know how women behaved or what women were like in the past. So this is one of the main problems I grapple with. So I must know, I must get inside the skin of a Mauryan woman. How to do that? My method has been to read a lot of plays and prose, obviously in Sanskrit, written around that time. And when I read those, then I try and understand what is the woman actually like. So there are lots of women characters, in so many plays. Bhas was a playwright who wrote around that time. I have also read Bhas and Kalidas. So these are the two playwrights whose plays I've concentrated on. And, there is this subaltern school of historiography. I don't want to make this an academic discussion, but whatever you're saying about knowing how the ordinary person actually lives, that's all that subaltern historiography is all about. So there are ways of parsing historical sources of evidence so that you drill down to what the ordinary person was thinking. Like now, Misrakesi is not that ordinary because she is a little extraordinary, and she moves into the elite of the Mauryans by the time the second book has come. But to get into the skin of a Mauryan woman, how would she behave? What would she say? What would she do? That is one of my major issues. That's what I grapple with most of the time. But I also feel that there are some things which haven't changed. If you're a mother, you're a mother. The relationship between a mother and her child or children, it has not, basically changed. The dilemmas of how much time to spend on your child, how much time to spend on your work, how to deal with your husband if he is also there in the workspace. And, a personal anecdote, my husband and I also did work in the same office for 2 or 3 years. So I also had this experience of working as a professional partner with my husband. So that brings in its own stresses and strains. So, that's what I want to tell anyone who wants to read it. Don't read it as though this is some musty, fusty person who you are not going to identify with at all. This woman, Misrakesi, will feel like the woman next door or the woman sitting in the cubicle next to you. She has work, she has relationship issues, she has children, she has family issues, the same things that all of us do. And that, I think, is part of why I'm fascinated with history. Because it's us in a different perspective. It's us through a different angle. And that's what I try and write about, actually.
Yeah, so in this second book, I think interestingly, once she gets married, some of the romance fizzles out, and she starts wondering, like
Yes.
like many people experience that. Initially there's so much passion, and then they're all stuck in the domesticity and the in-laws and
Yes.
all that. So that also happens to her in this.
Yes, it does happen. Yes. And I've also tried to, take some serious postpartum issues, although not that seriously, because I don't want to make it a kind of morose or dark book. That's never me. But there are issues with women after they have children, issues with their bodies, issues with their relationship with their husband. Everything has to change. So I have tried to put that in there. And again, it was interesting. I don't know whether who knows the person who was editing at the time. And she had raised a lot of issues about that. That how do you know this happens? And is this a proper way in which a woman who has just had children will react, etc., etc. So, as a mother and a wife of 30 years standing, I do have some expertise in this area. So I did reassure her. I did want to also pick up those important issues which are sometimes just ignored. What happens to the relationship between a man and a woman when they become parents? So I have tried to pick up a lot of, personal things, Rashmi. In the big historical canvas, there are small strokes of personal issues which are relatable and which happen to so many of us in today's world.
Yeah, I think that's why the book is very interesting. I mean, it doesn't feel like a historical book which has no relevance to our life, because the characters do think and have the same kind of dilemmas as you or me. One of the things, like in the first book,
Rashmi, can I just interject and just say one last thing about this? Perhaps it happens always that a writer who is writing historical fiction tends to project one's own attitudes to the past. So I cannot say with a kind of 100% guarantee that this is the way they would have thought. The element of my projection will very much be there. So I would just like, everyone who's reading the book to be aware of it. It's inescapable. because I am not, in fact, living in 323 BCE. I am living in the 20th and 21st
Well,
century.
until we invent a time machine and we can go back and check, I mean, we'll go with your version, because obviously anything that you write, we don't have 100% surety. Even the historical facts are not always 100%
Yes.
accurate
Correct.
in terms of, we are not, nobody knows
Yeah.
who were Chandragupta Maurya's parents, for example, right?
Yes.
Different conjectures about
Correct.
that. So somebody may.
And that is a problem with writing about ancient India. It was very long ago, and sources of evidence have to be passed and evaluated and analyzed with great care. And due diligence and a lot of hard work, but everyone should keep in mind the fact that, well, this is based on evidence and it is based on certain things which are there, but there is certainly a projection of my own modern age ideas and attitudes to that time. But I have very consciously been aware of this fact, and I have not tried to make it a modern feminist book.
But in its own form, there were feminists at that point also, right? There were strong women who, did things which were not very conventional. So your protagonist is like that. It's not that there could have not ever been a person like her at that time. There were people who did something, and we may not know about all the details, but
Yes,
we know about some of them.
it's just that the today's modern feminist model may not fit in there, but there were definitely women doing their own thing, and much more in ancient India than anywhere else.
Okay. So one thing I want to ask you about, like things like the clothing, like what we see her wearing here. I think in the first book I discovered that it's called Antarya and Uttarya, and I never ever actually.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they taught us in school, but I don't remember. And then you said that our saris have also evolved from those clothing, and I see you're wearing a lovely sari. I think it's hand painted.
Yes, I am very proud of the sari. I would like to show everyone this panel. It's hand painted Madhubani on organza. Now, Madhubani is from Bihar. Madhubani is the center is in Patna and nearby. And that is also the place from where Misrakesi comes. That is also the place where this book is set. And I would love to think that, we are in some way connected, because yes, the Uttariya, Antariya and the Kaya Band and the Kanchuki, all those things are relatable to what we wear today. We've just made the Uttariya has become this long, big sari that we drape. The Antariya has become the petticoat. The Kanchuki has become the blouse. And the way I am wearing it, for example, or the way you are wearing it is, of course, because of the family of Jorasanko, the family of Rabindranath Tagore. But the links between the sari and the Uttariya, Antariya, Kaya Band, Kanchuki are really strong. And if anybody would be very interested in this, then I have a web series, a documentary on YouTube. So there are episodes dedicated to this, and dedicated to the way, to understanding the way people dressed at the time.
That's called Maurya Lok. You can tell us the name also.
Yes. So it's called Maurya Lok and Bharat Kirti channel. And do go there. If anyone wants to know the background, what did people eat, drink, wear, how did they spend their leisure, etc. So all those things are over.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I really wish that we could teach history to our students, through these kind of stories which bring alive the time. Maybe, of course, can't use your book because it has a little bit of elements which won't be liked in schools too much, love and romance and so on. But, some other simplified versions where we, bring history alive and make them realize it is relevant today. Because somehow people feel that history ka koi relevancy nahi. It's just mugging up some dates and giving an exam. Whereas everything that you do today, whatever the way that you live, it has a link to the past, and more so in India than most other countries which have given up the traditional dress, given up the traditional food, traditional many things. Even we have lost a lot, but still we are hanging on to.
Yeah, yes, we are still hanging on.
Yeah,
we can still trace the roots. So what I am actually thinking of writing a book like this now, Rashmi, a simplified book on ancient India, which will, it will be short, simple, easily accessible, so that it's interesting and illuminating, and it tells people something about their past, something that we are perhaps right now really cut off from.
Okay. So how do you think Chanakya's Arthashastra is applicable in today's India?
Oh my God, that's such a question. I'll have to write a book on this. Because, okay, let's take, I don't know which aspect do we want to take. Let's take the aspect of politics. So he has looked at any nation state in terms of 7 elements. And those elements are still the elements that we look at in any nation state. So what's it? He calls it Swami or the king, which is leadership. The second element is administration. Amatya, he calls it. It's administration. The third element is Janpad, which is the land and the people. And then you have Durg and Dand, which is external security. And you have Kosh, which is finance, and you have Mitra, which is international relations. Now, this is an eminently reasonable, useful, and pertinent kind of way in which to understand or look at any nation state. Let's take Mitra, for example, because I have done a lot of talks on this and I've done a lot of research on this. So there are certain ways in which he looks at the way you should look at the entire world if you want your king, he calls the king the Vijigishu, to be the winner in the strife that is the world. So let's call it, he calls it conquest, let's call it achieving your geopolitical aims. Now, the ways in which he has set out, what are the different countries, what are the relationships, how do you maintain those relationships, how do you send envoys, what kind of things do you do, they are exactly 100% applicable to today's world, and even more because Chanakya operated at a time where there were many nations. Like today, we've become multipolar. We don't have, two big powers or one unipolar world, multipolar. So, yeah, and in fact, again, it's interesting you ask this because in conjunction with the Vivekanand Foundation and with a few others, I am writing and working and doing a lot of research on this area to prepare a framework using Chanakya and putting in, Quad, BRICS, IPPF, everything. So it's amazing how some framework, which was thought of 3,000 years ago or even before, because it's part of the political science tradition of India, can be so pertinent. And again, this was one specific example, but in general, if you take the area of finance, take the area of administration, take the area of taxation. I was an income tax professional, so I am very interested in the tax part of it. So take taxation. He has certain principles of taxation and he tells you how to tax. Those principles are still today as appropriate as ever. So he says, you should tax like bees suck pollen from the flower and the flower doesn't know it. And you should give it back like rain so that everyone knows that it is raining. So these are very clever ways in which to envisage public finance. So this, in fact, is such a large question, Rashmi, that I would love to have maybe, a set of conversations on this question.
Yeah, no, but you must write a book on this because I think it's very pertinent. And I mean, see, every time that same knowledge has to be repackaged and reintroduced to a new generation. So I think it is important to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that, because I write a lot about entrepreneurs and business, I was interested to see in this book that there is a lot of mention of guilds. And I was not aware that there were guilds in ancient India. I had heard about guilds in Europe because when you go there for some tours in Belgium and all Netherlands, they tell you we had these different guilds, but I was not knowing that even India had them. So tell us a little bit about that aspect, what was business like? And in this book, you've also, a lot of the plot is around the guilds.
Yes. So at the time of Chandragupta, at the time of the Mauryans, we have a lot of information on these guilds. Now, these guilds, some of them were business guilds, textiles, gold, silver, mining, etc. There were also warrior guilds, which were there only, they used to bear arms and fight. But at that time, according to the sources that we get from Pali, Buddhist sources, there were 18 major guilds. These 18 major guilds carried out different businesses. Now, if we want to talk about business during the Mauryan period, it is very interesting to note that there was something which was the private sector, because people did their own business and sold their stuff, etc. Then there was also the public sector, because there were certain things which were reserved for the state. Mining, for example, iron ore, gold, certain things were reserved for the state, but there was also a sector which you can call kind of mixed, because the state provided funds and resources. Then those funds and resources were used for production, and either they were sold back to the state, or the state took its own fees, its own returns in terms that are set down in the Arthashastra. And there were also these businesses which were carried out for welfare purposes. For example, take textiles. Textiles and cotton were a huge business at the time. They were the most important guild was with the one which was for textiles. But there was also a system where for indigent widows and women who had nobody to support them, the state used to provide them with yarn so that they could weave cloth and then sell it back to the state. In that way, they were also supported. So Chanakya's thinking about business was not in any set box. The idea was to generate as many resources as possible. Remember, agriculture was the most important thing that was done at the time. So it was the same for agriculture and the same for irrigation. Now there was irrigation, which was done by huge public works. There was also irrigation sources which were made by small people, small canals or small tanks. They were made by individuals. So I would, it's a great example of a mixed economy where wherever the state needs to put in lots of resources, lots of money to do that. But at the same time, individual innovation, individual effort, and individual hard work were rewarded. It's important to note that the Mauryan period was a kind of, axial period or liminal period. It was a time of great change. So there were lots and lots of self-made people in that time. I really think often, Rashmi, that there is a kind of parallel with the way things are today. There is a lot of energy in our country. There is a lot of energy amongst young people to do a lot of things and to create businesses, to, do things and produce things and become rich and become self-made. That same kind of energy was there during the Mauryan period. Chandragupta Maurya is the greatest example of a self-made man.
Yeah.
And then you have certain inscriptions, etc., also about other people. There is a person called Pushyagupta, who is also mentioned, who is a Vaishya, but who rises to become the viceroy of one of the provinces. So this again, needs a book on its own.
So I think those of you who haven't read Urnabhih at all, you are lucky because you can read part 1 and part 2 together, and then part 3 is going to come soon.
Yeah, so let me show them part 1 also. So this is part 1 and part 2, and these are both my first copies. So this was the first copy I got of the first one, and this is the first copy I got of the second one.
So I think it also shows the evolution of Misrakesi. In the first one is a little, different. In the second, she's become a bit domesticated. In the first, she's...
So do you remember how the other character, Chandramukhi, scolds her that you really become, I cannot recognize you. What have you become? I don't approve of you. But Rashmi, tell me something about the differences you found in Misrakesi, because it's very fascinating for me. Perhaps you tell me something. In fact, you will tell me something that I don't know, because I just write. I don't kind of analyze it. So tell me, what did you find which was different?
No, obviously every human being evolves, right? Initially, she was a novice. She was setting, she was trying to make her name for herself. I think obviously in this one, she is more confident in some ways. In her career, she's more confident, but in her personal life, she's shaky. Earlier, it was opposite, or maybe she was at that time, she was very much focused on just creating a name for herself, creating a place for herself. She didn't have anything, so she's very hungry and willing to do anything. And now she's a bit secure in the personal front, but then that also thoda damadol ho jata hai. But I think she handles the office part quite well. And even her, like restarting her, I don't know what the name, what is her establishment called?
The Scribe's establishment, the Prashastra.
She was running the...
Apsara Sabha.
Apsara Sabha, how she delegates everything, and that's how an entrepreneur also has to grow, right? I mean, if I have to hand over to somebody else and trust them. Earlier, she was doing everything herself.
Yes.
So that's
and it's difficult for her. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to hand it over to anyone else. So she just wants somebody who's very close to her, who she can trust and who she can probably control. That's why she wants somebody she can control.
Yeah. And I think she misses the freedom she had in Apsara Sabha. Here she has to still now and
yes, very much.
So that is also something that happens after marriage in India always to women. But I think her mother-in-law and all seem to be quite nice, but of course she has other people who don't like her. So I think it's all it's as you would expect. I mean, I don't think human character has changed over centuries. There were always some people who will like you, some who will be envious of you. Many people are envious of her. I think the first book was jealous of her.
Yes, in the second book they are jealous of her, and that leads to a lot of trouble. Because jealousy does lead to a lot of trouble. But I am also going to explore the relationship between her and Manjari, the one who runs the Apsara Sabha for her. I am going to explore it a lot in the next book.
Okay.
Because I feel that is also a kind of relationship, which is often not discussed or written about so much.
Yeah.
Here are these two self-made women. At one time, one is dependent on the other. But what happens later when the status changes or when the situation changes? So I feel, sometimes the relationships, women to women, are not explored all that much. And I find it very interesting to explore those.
Yeah. So I don't want to give away the plot or any, so we won't go too much in the discussion, but tell us a bit about the third book also. Where is that going to go?
So in the third book, I picked up that aspect of the Mauryan Empire, which was actually overarching, but we tend to miss it, which is the fact that it was huge and full of resources, and it used those resources for the development of all kinds of aspects, economic aspects. So this is going to be on water. Now, why did I pick up water? Because water has become a vexed issue today. There are issues of scarcity of water, contamination, pollution of water, and you try to live as close to a water body as possible. But how did the Mauryan Empire control water? How did it react when water scarcity became an issue? Because remember, it is said that there was a 12-year drought, and the last 12 years of Chandragupta Maurya's reign were spent in a very, very serious drought in the entire country. And it led to such a situation that after that, Chandragupta Maurya also abdicated and left. But during that time, how did the empire deal with this problem of drought and deal with the problem of scarcity? Through commissioning huge irrigation waterworks. Now, that is one part. The other part is that I also read a lot of Sangam literature, which is Tamil literature. The Mauryans are mentioned in that. Not just the Mauryans, but there is mention of a huge lost treasure of the Nandas. The Nandas were the kings who were just before the Mauryans. So they were supposed to have amassed a lot of wealth and gold, and they had hidden it somewhere. So in Sangam literature, there is a poet called Mamulanar who mentions this, and he mentions where it was hidden and how it was hidden. So I am going to incorporate that, and all our old friends are going to be trying to get that treasure. I'm also going to introduce a very big underworld character, because there are always criminal elements everywhere. And there is going to be a very interesting story of Muldev and his wife. And anyone who has read the Badkaha will know what Muldev and his wife, or if you've read one or two of Shakespeare's plays. Okay, but I don't want to give out spoilers too much.
I mean, Muldev and Chandramukhi. Sorry, his wife, who is the con.
Yeah, not wife, kind of companion. Yeah. Muldev is a scoundrel, a thief, but a very lovable one.
No, in fact, I would love to see all these people on screen and, see it come alive. So I hope one day, like Game of Thrones and like so many others.
Yes, absolutely. I hope so. I hope that, somebody somewhere is listening to you and is going to come forward and say, yes, we want to make this web series or film, and I hope that we can announce it sometime. That would be just great.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think for all of you who love history, of course, this is a book that you must read. This is part 2. Part 1, I don't have because I've lent it to somebody. I think you have
So
part 1.
this is part 1.
Part 1, this is part 2. And part 3 will be coming soon. Do read these books because they're very entertaining. They're also very informative. So it's not at all boring. Even if you don't like history, you never liked it, I think you can just relate to the characters and the plot, and it's very fast paced. And I mean, I was traveling, I used to go every day and read few pages, but I wanted to like enjoy it over like few days. Otherwise, I think I would have sat up all night and finished reading. So
I did try to make it a page turner. I did try to at the end of each chapter leave you wanting to know what happens next.
Yeah, that's how it has to be written nowadays, especially if it's going to become a web series. So you already got all the masala ready for adaptation. So I wish you all the best for this book and for your future books. And as I said, I hope you keep them coming soon, because you're such a repository and treasure house of knowledge. And read the original texts in Sanskrit, Pali, which most of us cannot do. So you have to be our guide and interpreter to that world. So please do accelerate your writing pace. If I can help by putting little bit of pressure and danda on you, I am happy.
Yes, please do. And for everyone who's listening, she does text me and push me a lot. Thank you for those kind words, Rashmi. It's wonderful to hear some appreciation, because and I know writing is a lonely job. So it's only when somebody tells you that they've read what you've written that you can actually relate to others in terms of your writing. So thank you very much for those kind words. I will continue to do that, and I will continue to make the past accessible. Read up all the stuff you don't want to read and then put it in simple and entertaining terms.
Great. We look forward
I will continue to do that. Thank you.